When the state ordered a group of teenagers to be temporarily housed at Angola, the decision was highly scrutinized by juvenile justice advocates. The criticism raised questions about how Louisiana treats youth offenders before and after they leave the system. In this episode of LPB's exclusive gubernatorial coverage, The Way Forward Election 2023, experts and advocates speculate on evidence-based solutions that prevent crime. This is a video of teenagers escaping the Bridge City Center for Youth, a juvenile facility close to New Orleans.
This is one of more than a dozen escapes from the center in a year.
This was one of two incidents within a 24-hour period that led to the state's decision to relocate the teens. You see, escapes and violent incidents aren't uncommon at Bridge City.
This is the fourth time in recent memory that we've had to come in here and retake this facility.
Pressure mounted as people pushed for the state to intervene. Eventually, Governor John Bell Edwards did.
We will temporarily move some, but not all of those youth, to a separate and isolated location at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. While they are temporarily housed in this separate building at the Louisiana State Penitentiary and thereafter at Jetson, all juveniles will remain in the care and custody of OJJ. They will not have contact with adult inmates and will continue to receive all of the services they currently receive through OJJ, including education.
His decision was a controversial one that ended in a lawsuit and serious backlash, but it opened the door to a bigger discussion. Is Louisiana sentencing an effective public safety strategy for youth and adult offenders?
When you take a young person, as our expert Vinny Schiraldi said at the first hearing, and put them in a building that quote unquote screams prison, you send a message to that young person that this is what they're worth. This is what you will be.
David Utter is a lawyer and the executive director of the Fair Fight Initiative. He's been working directly with the youth being held in Angola. He says the case sheds a light on youth incarceration in the state. So how does Louisiana treat youth offenders?
Well, right now, it's incredibly punitive, and it is completely counter to what we know works for adolescent development and juvenile delinquency. Most states are moving away from incarceration as a consequence for juvenile delinquency.
Right now, Louisiana has more than 3,000 in custody, which partially explains why teens were moved to Angola in the first place. The other juvenile facilities were over capacity or in poor condition.
Right now, that's our reflex. It's group home or secure care. It's pulling the child out of the community. What Louisiana needs to do is invest in programs where the consequence is not pulling the kid from home, but getting the resources to the home, to the community, so that kid can succeed.
What do you know about youth offenders? What usually causes them to commit crimes?
We have really been doing research for over 30 years and have narrowed it down to kind of three of the most common pathways. One is you have a child who's very rebellious and is acting out and sort of rebelling against authority, enjoys not conforming and doing things that break the rules and break the law. You have a group that has trouble controlling their impulses. They get angry very quickly. They act impulsively.
Paul Frick is a psychology professor at LSU. He studies criminal activity in teenagers and children. In his research, he finds that the best way to reduce crime is prevention.
It's very important that we start with what causes it, because the way to rehabilitate and the way to structure juvenile justice is through what's considered risk and needs responsivity, okay? And what I'll explain by that is, first you have the risk, and so you decide, how much of a risk is this child to the community? Because that tells you then where you need to place the child and treat the child. Then you have to do the needs, but that requires support. You can't just say, we're going to keep you out of the justice system, but go off on your own. You have to have community services to provide the kids with what they need so that they can be successful.
In the mid-2000s to around 2012, Louisiana was part of the Model for Change program to reduce the number of youth offenders. They developed risk assessment, expanded the use of evidence-based practices, developed a data group, and adopted best practice detention standards.
We went from being one of the worst in providing those community mental health programs to juveniles who are in the justice system to second in the nation in terms of that.
Between 2006 to about 2010, juvenile incarceration dropped 40%.
But what has happened is over time, Louisiana hasn't been able to sustain the funding for that type of mental health treatment in the community.
But there could be a way to change these outcomes. Dr. Steve Procopio with the Public Affairs and Research Council says addressing mental health is a step toward reform. I guess what are some of the solutions that Cable and PAR have come up with?
So evidence-based really means sort of put things in two categories. It's like, is this just rhetoric? Like, are we just going to lock criminals up forever? And if you look at the history of what we did in Louisiana, that's what we have done. We led in incarceration rates. And the issue is that, did that really make a difference? And as far as the evidence we can see, no, it didn't.
Procopio says literacy and mental health are directly linked to incarceration rates. A candidate's position on literacy and mental health policies give voters important insight into what incarceration could look like.
If you look at reducing some of the core issues, if you're going to eventually let people out, and we are, because that's how the sentencing works, then let's try to spend some of the money that we can free up through putting people on parole, especially nonviolent offenders, on things that will then make them less likely to commit crimes in the first place.
On September 8th, a Louisiana judge ruled that teens housed at Angola had until September 15th to be moved out of the adult facility. But a temporary hold from a federal appeals court has brought everything to a standstill. The Public Affairs and Research Council and Council for a Better Louisiana have additional guidelines you can read about on public safety. You can find that on their website at resetlouisiana.com.